So this lecture's in two parts because it's a really big topic. We're talking about motivation here in chapter 5. So here's part 1, and I'm going to start with this motivational or demotivator print. It's from a website, despair.com. You can go out and see some pretty funny things on despair.com. Motivation. If a pretty poster and a cute saying are all it takes to motivate you, you probably have a very easy job. The kind robots will be doing soon. Okay, motivation is an interesting topic. It's the process of arousing and sustaining goal-directed behavior, and it's a hard thing to really wrap your mind around. What motivates, what causes somebody to want to do something. In my ebook, The Bookshelf in Your Boss's Brain, I write the often leadership is reduced to motivation, as if people are like hot air balloons that need to be continually pumped up with motivation in order to function. However, people are more like compasses that naturally point to magnetic north unless interfered with by lesser metallic objects. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. That sometimes we have this idea we have to go motivate people. Well, if you have to go motivate them, it's because they don't see the value in something. If I were to drop a gold brick in front of you and say, well, you know, it's yours if you want it, you would be pretty motivated to grab it immediately, right? Because you see the value in it. But if you don't see the value of something, then the boss has to pump you up and get you motivated to do it, because often it's a top-down kind of edict from on high that they're trying to pump you up. But otherwise, you're naturally motivated for things that you think are going to be useful to you. Okay, 3 groups of motivational theories. So you have internal, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we'll talk about in a bit. Process theories, like expectancy theory. If I do this, will I get that result? And then we have external, like two-factor theory. I'm going to deal with two-factor theory in the next lecture, or the second half of this lecture rather, and I'll talk about the first two here. So early philosophers and motivational theories. Before you get to, business kind of theories, we talked about motivation a lot in the writings of the Reformation and the Protestant work ethic. John Calvin pointed these kind of things out, Martin Luther, the Puritans, and all of them were thinking in terms, and you'll be reading about some of these things, all of them were reading or were thinking in terms of, my work glorifies God. I mean, I don't really have to write a cross on something. I just have to do it extremely well to bring glory to God. That's Martin Luther's kind of thinking. Or that there's not really sometimes in Christian circles, you get this idea that if you really want to please God, go be a pastor or a missionary. Those are the things that please God. But, don't go into business because that's just filthy lucre. No, nonsense. Go into business and be salt and light in that place. So you can be, and now, if that's true and that's pleasing to God, that's motivational. It's your calling is business. That's motivation to do excellence. Then the next step is we're looking at things like Sigmund Freud, who's trying to look into the unconscious and try to understand what is really going on with personal motives. And then we're looking at Adam Smith, who's talking about enlightened self-interest, and that's the basis or the undergirding for capitalism. Or Frederick Taylor, who's trying to arrange the system in the one right way in order to make things as efficient as possible. Eventually, we'll deal with things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs makes some intuitive sense, like, hey, you're really not going to be all about self-esteem when you can't eat or can't sleep safely, right? So you get your physiological needs, then your safety and security needs, then you can think about love or esteem or self-actualization. Intuitively, there's something that seems to make sense. The literature is mixed on this, and for my money, I don't think there's a lot of real grounded research that says that this is really legit, but it does seem to intuitively make sense. I mean, that's true. The problem is that people overturn this all the time, right? Missionaries, for example, overturn. They forget about the physiological and safety and security needs and go to dangerous places because of love, right? So, and that they're not the only group that overturn this, but this happens. Theoretically, it's supposed to work that way, but I'm not so sure. Now, motivational theories like Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X is a set of assumptions that of how to manage individuals who are motivated by lower order needs, as opposed to Theory Y, they're managed by higher order needs. And it kind of functions with, Theory X and Theory Y, if you were to draw a line here. Okay, I think Theory X and Theory Y are a little flawed. I beat up on those in my dissertation because I think it's only showing part of the truth. in reality, okay, so Douglas McGregor thinks that, people that are managing based on theory X, they think that workers are naturally indolent. That means lazy. That they lack ambition. They are naturally resistant to change. They're not bright, and they really don't want to work. So you have to push them in order to get them to work. Okay, that's theory X. Theory Y is that people are actually motivated and they want to develop their potential, and they have a capacity for assuming responsibility, and they're ready to do this. Okay, great. So you have two half-truths that make the whole. Here's the biblical reality of how human beings are. You are made in God's image. You have incredible capacity, creative power. You have this ability to do wonderful, amazing things. You're creative as a reflection of God because He's creative and He made you. Now, you've also, that's theory Y. Now, you've also fallen into sin. So every part of you is affected by that. And so that's why we do bad, evil things to each other in this world. I mean, something's wrong within the human heart. So that's the theory X part. So if you put the two together, you get to actually kind of a right place where theory Y, now in organizations, what you probably need is a little bit more theory Y for workers and a little bit more theory X for the bosses. Watch out for people when they get power. As people rise in power, that theory X part, you got to watch out. It's not that they're lazy, but they become greedy. They become trying to rule or dominate over others. This is one of the things that the American founding fathers had very right in their Constitution, was trying to, Thomas Jefferson talked about, let's hear no more about relying on, this is not quite exactly the quote, on relying on the goodwill of men, but we'll bind them down with the chains of the Constitution, right? So they can't be tyrants over us. That was the idea. So we have all kinds of rules to make it very hard for one person to get such power that they can dominate other people. So that's thinking through both theory X and theory Y, coupling it together. The incredible value that's in a human being coupled with the depravity that exists because of sin. Okay? So that's just one way of looking at it. So management's task is to arrange conditions with this theory Y, to arrange conditions and operational methods so that people can achieve their own goals by directing efforts in organizational goals. That's generally good until they get too much power, in which case you want to bind that down. Okay? Now, Alphater's ERG theory is existence, relatedness, and growth. And look how they're trying to make it fit with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think there's perhaps something to that. I wouldn't, say that this is necessarily a great way of approaching it, but yeah, people are driven by these kind of needs: existence, relatedness, and growth. We know that we need meaning. We want to relate to other people because that's how we're geared, that's how we're made, and we want to grow. I mean, that's a natural human tendency. That's part of that being made in God's image. McClelland's need theory, there's a need for achievement. There's a couple different needs. There's three different ones. There's a need for achievement, and people that need to achieve, they're going to excel. They're going to compete. They want goals to overcome. And then there's a need for power, and people with a need for power, they want to influence other people. They want to make a difference. They want to be in charge, right? And then there's a need for affiliation, and these people need warm, intimate relationships. They want to be, well-liked or a good colleague or whatever else. So if you take all three of those, you have the need for achievement, power, and growth. And again, you can kind of match things up to some degrees across the spectrum. But I think with McClelland, it's really interesting because different types in the need affiliation, power, and achievement. If you have a high need for power example, you're not as good of a, okay, let me back up. If you're a high need for achievement, you tend to be a really good salesman. But if you're a high achievement, you don't tend to be as good of a sales manager. Somebody with a high need for power tends to do a better job with that. Diplomats, you want to drag those people from the affiliation crowd, right? Those people that are relational and want to work together. And so you just have to figure out how you're geared. It's kind of like the Myers-Briggs that we talked about before, and figure out where you belong within these needs. Okay, this is the end of part one, the first two of those three. I'll talk about the last third in the next video.